Just waiting for the live stream. Let me just get that done. Okay, good afternoon everybody and welcome to today's meeting on Thursday the 21st of November. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photos, making an audio recording and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note that this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page on the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or filmed. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Please do not spend time collecting personal belongings. We will be assembling on the High Street opposite the Guildhall, where that's the assembly point. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. This is really important because we want everyone to hear everything. And if necessary, the speaker can move, okay, towards your mouth. Okay, right. So with that done, I think we've got a full house of everybody with no substitutes. So let's move on to declarations of interest. Has anybody got any to declare, please? No, none for this meeting, thank you. Right, in that case, we'll go to the minutes of the last meeting. This was held on the 24th of October. I will have an amendment when we get to page 6, which I will talk to you about. But let's go through it page by page, and please alert me if there's anything you want to raise. So if we go page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then on page 6, we had a proposal to write a letter to the Corporate Director of Finance and Resources from the Planning Committee. We wrote that letter, but in it, we also, you can see the bullet points, we also wrote for the provision of solar panels to provide sustainable energy. So I would just like to add that as an additional bullet point. Does everyone agree that we said that at the meeting? Because it was in the letter. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Page 7 and page 8. Okay, everyone happy with those? Thank you. Right, we didn't have a site visit today. Margaret, do we have public participation or representation, please?
We have no public participation, Chair, but we do have representation on agenda item 7, Warren Bank Barn Manor Farm, Malvern Road, for which we have a speaker to comment on the item, and we have the applicant. Thank you.
Okay, so shall we have, which order are we going to do it, Margaret? We're going to have Mark first, the resident? Yeah, so Mark, I don't know if you want to come forward and sit in the public seat, but we'll have the officer report first, and then after that, it'll be your turn to speak. So the presentation is going to be done by Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So, the application site relates to a proposed cattle rearing shed at Warren Bank Farm, which is part of the Bennett's Farms. The proposed barn is required to improve the existing operations to make them more efficient and to protect the welfare of animals. Just some pictures so that you get an appreciation of the farm complex. Here we have the existing barns and storage areas. These are the existing cattle or calf igloos. The proposed building is the other side of that tree hedge. And again, we've got the igloos for the calves. And again, that's looking back at the existing buildings and some of the herd that are contained therein. Looking towards the properties that are adjacent to the access road, and the access road runs the other side of that hedge that you can see in the far distance. This is the looking back the other way in terms of the existing field. And again, another picture just looking to the far distance, and you can see the houses in the far distance. This is looking across the internal road, and you'll see within the report that it's referenced as the central internal road, and that leads back down towards the glamping pods and the other areas of buildings at Bennett's Farm. That's looking across to the left-hand side is the application site, and you can see that tree screen that we talked about before, and the calf igloos are on the right-hand side of that hedge. Again, just a picture of some existing buildings. And again, looking back into the site of where the application site is for the proposed building. Just a picture that the applicants have provided in terms of the existing conditions of winter field, of how wet it gets and also how dry it gets within the summer. Useful just to get a context of the aerial photo, so you can see in the sort of centre left the existing farm buildings, and you can see the residential properties of Lower Wick to the right hand side, and the River Team runs to the south of this site. So again, this is looking up towards the access track, and you can see the trees and the hedges of that access track, and the site is towards the north of that picture. And again, back to an overall aerial photo of the site. So the site is located adjacent to existing farm buildings, as you can see on that aerial photo, and that just shows the application site, and showing the hedges that we saw, those trees, and the application site is to the left of those hedges. That's the existing plan which the applicant has provided, showing how that existing vehicles enter the site from the central access track and also from the northern access track, and how they access the area around the farm buildings. We'll come back to that plan a little bit later. So the application site is located within the Riverside Conservation Area, which is quite a large area. All within that red line is the conservation area for the Riverside. It's also within designated green space, and it also is quite close to the River Team Site of Special Scientific Interest, the SSSI, and the River Severn Special Wildlife Site, which are located to the south and also to the east of the site. The site is of archaeological interest, being part of the land associated with the Battle of Worcester, and just a plan that the applicants provided as part of their heritage statement in terms of the Battle of Worcester plan, and you can see how that relates to the application site. But also being within the conservation area, and there are a number of listed buildings not adjacent to the site but in proximity, in further distance away. So the application site is there with the blue star, and you can see the various grades of listed buildings shown. The recent history of the site has approved an extension to the existing milking parlour and a hay barn, which have all been approved under permitted development. The proposed building for livestock is the same size and the location of the approved hay barn. There are residential properties in Crane Drive and Cormorant Rise, and they're located approximately 78 metres from the proposed building. The properties are separated from the main agricultural field by an access road with hedges and some trees, as we see from that picture, but also the previous picture that we've seen. A number of objections have been raised, which are summarised within paragraph 6.1. It is accepted that agricultural buildings are acceptable in principle on existing farm holdings, and the approved hay barn provides a position that has accepted the principle of a building in this location. The application in essence is considering the appropriateness for the use of the building for livestock. For completeness, full consideration has been given to the position, the design and the impact of the building as set out within the committee report. In locational terms, the building is located within the green space, but the proposal will take away some green space, although the location has been chosen to limit the amount of land take and to focus the building within the existing group of agricultural buildings. The proposed landscaping to the site will enhance the appearance of the site, providing enhanced visual quality to the surroundings. And you can see on that plan that not only are there trees proposed, but there is also bunds proposed, which are 5 metres wide by 2 metres high, and it's a 20-metre wide landscape strip which will be provided with trees planted along the bund of the whole of that strip. When assessing the land in respect of the quality of the green space, it's considered that the building won't take up much of the additional quality of green space, but actually the landscaping will improve it. And as such, it's considered that this is acceptable and in compliance with policy SWDP 38. And you can see the overall quality of the land at the moment, and what will be proposed is looked at as a benefit in terms of providing that additional landscaping. As we mentioned earlier, the site is within the historic landscape of the Battle of Worcester, but there are no listed buildings which will be adversely impacted as part of the proposal. In archaeological terms, you'll see that the Council's archaeology advisor advised that a scheme of investigation will be required prior to the works commencing. This is considered to be proportionate with the amount of building works that are proposed in order to erect the cattle shed. And this can be secured by an appropriate condition. In respect of design, the building proposes a 45.7 metre by 13.7 metre building, which is 5 metres at the total ridge height. The building will be open-sided with areas of the building clad where they are sealed up with Yorkshire boarding. The pitched roof will be constructed in grey fibre cement roof panels. The building's design and materials are considered appropriate for the type of building, and it would assimilate well within the surrounding areas, being of similar design of the existing buildings that are within the farm complex. The additional tracks that are proposed are required to serve the building will be constructed of railway sleepers, which will be minimal dig into the existing ground. On this basis, the design and the appearance of the building are considered to be acceptable and in accordance with SWDP 21. The visual impact of the building has been considered from the medium and long range views, and these are views and pictures which have been provided by the applicant and show views from the public footpath which runs along the River Teme. So you can see A and B, which are from the base of Howick Bridge and a little bit further along the Teme, and then further distant shows of C and D looking towards the site, and you can see those in the far distance, the existing agricultural buildings and the farm buildings there. It's considered that when the building is viewed from the south and the west, it will be seen in the context of the existing group of buildings and will result in no adverse harm. From the residential properties, and this picture shows that, to the north, it is proposed that the landscape strip will be provided, which incorporates a 5 metre wide and by 2 metre high bund. The entire strip in the bund will be planted. This will provide an effective screen to the proposed building and also to existing buildings within the complex. It is considered that the visual impact of the building will be acceptable, and the benefit of securing landscaping is an additional benefit over and above the existing approved position of the hay barn. And that just shows again that plan with the bund. A number of concerns have been expressed over the noise and the dust in relation to the track that runs alongside Crane Drive and Cormorant Rise. The proposal will not result in any increased intensification of the use, and therefore any issues experienced are not likely to increase. The applicant has provided additional details of how the building will be serviced by the track to the south, and a new access track will be provided to enable vehicles to service the building and then return via the southern access track, that central access track that we talked about earlier. It's not considered by officers that residents will be adversely affected by this proposal, over and above the existing situation. Members will note that both WRS and the Highway Authority have not offered any objections to the proposal. The proposed landscaping, whilst providing the visual screening, will also enhance the biodiversity of the site. Although submitted prior to the national BNG requirements, which members will have considered as part of the training earlier, it will provide a significant gain to biodiversity and ecology. In addition, the applicants have agreed to provide solar panels within the building. Other buildings on Manor Farm already have been provided with solar arrays, although this will be the first of the buildings within the immediate farm complex. And as such, this is considered as a positive and a progressive move on behalf of the applicant. The building is located outside of the areas of flood, and that shows the floodplains for both the River Severn and the River Team. And surface water will be dealt with through the existing surface water attenuation system. Matters of waste disposal will be considered through an appropriate waste management plan as required by Natural England to avoid any pollution to the River Team SSSI. In conclusion, the building has an approval under permitted development rights. The proposal before committee does not change the size or the design of the building, putting forward an alternative proposal to utilise the building for livestock instead of hay. The proposal will not result in an intensification of the operations, but provides a betterment in respect of farm management and animal welfare. The proposal provides some additional benefits through landscaping and the biodiversity gains, archaeological investigations, and also renewable energy. The concerns of residents are fully noted and they have been fully understood by officers. However, the proposal is considered to not result in any adverse harm over and above the existing situation. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions set out within section 9 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Really good to mention biodiversity net gain when we've just had our training as well. Just shows you how important it's going to be that we understand it. We'll now have the public speaker. This is Mark. He's a local resident and he's come just to comment on the application. Mark, you'll have 5 minutes. About 4:30, I'll do this, and when we get nearer 5, I'll need to stop you. Okay?
Am I on? Excellent. Firstly, thank you very much to the chair and the committee to allow me to come in and speak today and represent my neighbours. I want to recap one thing, or two things that I made in my comment when the planning application went in, that I was encouraged at the time that the application was considering the visual impact on residents with screening, etc., which I thought was really cool. But what I didn't pick up on and wasn't overly clear to me was the track, the access track that's been mentioned that runs alongside Crane Drive, which obviously in various times of year the screen is more full or less full depending upon foliage. This year has been typical in that large vehicles, depending upon the speed and the actual quality of the track at the time and the weather, will create large dust clouds which go over the hedge screening and will go up and down the road depending upon which way a vehicle is travelling. At which point your cars, your window ledges, windows, they do get covered in blackish matter. If you've got your windows open, which is reasonable to assume in the summer, you will end up with matter on the inside of your windows, on blinds, on windowsills, and it is an irritation, as is the noise. Now, I do appreciate that this is a working farm, absolutely, but I do know previously, especially when the Carrington Bridge works were being done, I believe that there was some earth storage on the Bennett's properties. They used to damp down the track with water to minimise dust periodically, which was good and beneficial. And I was told by another resident some time ago there was a speed limit enforced on, well, not enforced, but suggested to some vehicles travelling up and down that track, which again, at the time, reduced the irritation factor. But all these things are kind of temporary, because eventually you don't damp it with water, and you don't, you know, abide by a limit. All I would say is, because the original proposal didn't offer any real clarity to me on the use of that track and whether it be used even more, because it seemed reasonable to assume that as this development was to enhance and expand the farming capability, then traffic would increase. That seemed a reasonable assumption. Were that not the case, and alternative routes were being used, then, you know, all I would ask really is that monitoring of that track is active, to an extent that if it is dry, if it is dusty, if people are speeding up and down it, they could perhaps be advised to slow down a little and don't cause so much disruption. And, you know, that to me just seems like a reasonable, considerate thing to be enabling. And that's it. It's a comment. It's not an objection, because, you know, I've lived opposite working farms for my life, so it's something I'm aware of. But thank you. And I wish I'd done something with my hair.
Oh, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions, please, that are relevant to the application to ask the residents, please? If I start with Alex, and then it will be you, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, are you saying that you anticipate the track to come under increased use as a result of this application?
From reading the proposal in the first place, when, for example, previously the soil was being stored, there was an increase in large vehicles using it for transporting soil. And so one would assume, if you are now putting up a cattle shed for 150 calves, there will be an increase. It just seems natural during the construction and then following whilst the business expands its operation, which seems a reasonable assumption to me.
Councillor Amos?
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned in your presentation the words reasonable and considerate. Has that always been the case in this location, if I can put it like that?
I would say no. I think that there's a balance. Obviously, with the track being damped down historically, then that's an acknowledgement that there is dust anyway. And that causes a problem, be that a nuisance or an irritation or just an unreasonable, unneighbourly sort of act. But I appreciate, it is a working farm, that vehicles do go up and down there. All I would like to see really is that there's some consideration going forward and ongoing to perhaps slow some of the traffic down a little bit, because frankly, there are some large vehicles that do tank up and down there, and to just try to be considerate. That's all I'd ask for, really.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just follow that up. So, obviously you are being very reasonable. So would you say that if a condition were imposed on the use of this track, just in the limited sense you suggest, that then you would be happy with this application?
Absolutely. I think that if I'd picked up on that in the original plans, that track would be, the use of it would be minimised, then I don't think, having had discussions with my neighbours, that people would have any particular objection whatsoever to this going through.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reg?
Apologies, Chair. Been a while. Thank you for your comment and thank you for coming in. May I ask, would you say there are open kind of negotiations between residents and the farmer, as in do both sides talk to each other and raise these sort of issues? Have they been addressed, and have they been understood?
No, not to my knowledge. Historically, before I moved back, say 2018, I don't know. There could have been meetings or what have you. But again, that comes down to me personally. If I were doing something, if I'm having building work done at the house, then I will go around and talk to people and go, look, it might be problematic for a week because things are being delivered, but we'll be open and talk about it. I would kind of like to think that Mr. Bennett, for example, might say, listen, all the neighbours, come on round, buy a cup of tea at Willow Pond, and I'm just going to tell you, this is what we're planning to do. This is how it's not going to affect you, and don't worry about it, it will all be fine. And that to me seems a reasonable thing to do.
Councillor Agar, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming along and telling us what your issues are today. I don't know if you're aware of this committee's powers precisely. A lot of us have to think it through carefully. One of the things is there is a fallback position with this application, and that track is already in use. What we can do, I rather think, is to, and we usually do, impose a construction management plan which will minimise the disruption to you in terms of noise and dirt and all the rest of it. Given that the track already exists, we really don't have much power over that. What you could do, and I don't know if you already know this, is to get in touch with our regulatory services who do have powers to regulate noise and pollution. So that if you do have an issue with that track, that would be the course I would take. I don't know if you've known that before, but...
Yes, vaguely. I just think at the end of the day, and this is, it was really interesting to hear your members' explanation of the proposal, because my thought on this was, if that track is to be continually in use or to be used more, it seemed reasonable to me that if it had a more permanent road surface that was less likely to wear down, with those sort of vehicles, and a slight reduction in speed maybe, there would be far less disruption. Yeah. Slower moving vehicles don't cause as much surface to be kicked up, I would have thought.
Councillor Smith?
Supposing a condition was made that the track should be repaired and sealed, would that satisfy you and your neighbours?
Absolutely. That's what I get from talking to others. I mean, what you've got to remember is it's very difficult to see on those photographs how exactly close the track is. So there are elements, I didn't take my tape measure out, but that track could be from the curb line of Crane Drive that is closest, could be 2 metres, 3 metres at different points. For example, there's one house in the corner who is right by the track, probably no more than a metre away, and another at the other end, number 3, where the track runs along, brushes their fence. So they are very close as well. I just guess at the end of the day, we're lucky we're back in the middle. It just comes down to the dust. And I know that videos and photographic evidence have been submitted to show this, and I'll be honest, this wasn't the worst year.
Councillor Udall?
Sorry, your mouthing something got me. I couldn't hear.
Is this a new question?
It is.
Lovely, thank you.
It is. The question is it all vehicles which cause you problems on this footpath, on this road surface, or are you more particularly concerned about vehicles bringing cattle and heavy goods vehicles using it rather than smaller vehicles?
I would say it would be the larger vehicles that are the problem, which would require a bit more management. So if they were to be using it for construction far more, just some measures being put in place, reasonable measures, I think people would be satisfied with.
And could one of those measures be, which would help satisfy concerns of residents, a restriction on the number of hours where heavy goods vehicles would use that footpath, rather than using it 24/7? So you would know exactly when it's likely to happen or not.
And that would seem a reasonable position to take.
Okay.
Councillor Kimberley?
Thank you. In the report, I've been sort of reading through, particularly with interest, for some strange reason, with renewed interest in the biodiversity and landscape section. And one of the recommendations that was talked about by the officer who reviewed this was a bit more planting around, I think actually bordering onto this. Obviously, I'll need to check that that's the correct area that I'm referring to. In your view, would additional planting of trees and hedges along that track and sort of around the boundary of this development be a satisfactory step in the right direction in terms of noise and dust mitigation?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, natural screening is the best, isn't it? Because it's attractive. So, yeah.
Just a follow-up question. Are you and the neighbours aware that the sort of the proposal to put bunds with planting on them, and are they aware of that part of the proposal?
I may be wrong, so excuse me if I am, but I think some of these things were put in as additions during the process. So it might be that people haven't gone back again because it's, you know, you could say it's a bit cumbersome to get all the documentation done again.
Do I have any other questions? Nope. Thank you very much. If you'd like to go back, and we'll have the next speaker. This is Mr. Bennett, who is the applicant for the site. You will also have 5 minutes, and I'll do the same thing at about 4:30 to give you an indication. Okay. Start when you are ready.
Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to the council for giving me the opportunity to speak today. So I basically run the farm. I'm a 5th generation farmer at the site, so I've been back home now since 2013, sort of taking over the farm and running it now. We are a commercial dairy farm. We have 240 cattle in the herd, and we produce about 5,000 litres of milk a day. So that's probably enough for 10,000 people to have a pint of milk every day. So it's a proper full-scale commercial operation. We're basically doing everything we can to keep the farm viable and become greener and more sustainable. So we took the decision to turn our herd from an all-year-round calving herd to an autumn block calving herd. So that means instead of having 20 cows calving every month, they're all calving together in as tight a block as we can. We're at about a 15-week period. They'll all calve together, and they'll all go through their lactation at the same time. Where we are, as you saw from the flood map, we get quite wet, as you're probably aware of the area. So we can't really go for a low input system with, say, Frisian cows, because we couldn't turn out in the spring, most springs, unless they could swim. So we're keeping with the sort of the high yielding cows. We'll calve them in the autumn. We can then keep them on a high energy ration, get lots of milk out of them over the winter period, and then once they're back in calf, they can then go out into the fields and make the most out of grass and graze and be really energy efficient, and produce us that really good green milk over the summer months. And again, for the local community, it's keeping the fields green, which people enjoy to make the most of. But to be able to do that, we need to be able to be a viable working farm. This building is essential to allow us to do that. We've been in transition for 2 years, and it's been a real strain with our calves all coming at once. We've been shut down for the last 2 winters with tuberculosis, and that makes it virtually impossible to move calves. We don't use big continental calves, which there is a market for. We use the smaller ones so the cows can calve more easily. So your Herefords and your Aberdeen Anguses and Wagyus. But since they changed the rules on finishing units are no longer allowed to graze TB calves, they all have to be housed. So they don't really want young calves anymore. They want them at about 350 kilograms when they can put them straight into a finishing unit and run them through. So for dairy farms like us, we need to be able to keep those calves until we can get them to that size when there is a market for them. Last winter, we had to basically make pens in the yard with straw bales, We had some horrific pneumonia outbreaks, and the only other option is sort of shooting them at birth, which isn't something we really want to consider. So this is really essential for us, and it'll also give us the added benefit that on wet summers we can use the barn when there aren't calves for our dry cows, so they can eat in a covered feed face on a concrete pad, so they're not basically tearing up the fields, which again is a big attribution for dust as well. When the fields have been quite heavily poached over the spring, and then you get a dry summer, you get a hell of a lot more dust than if the cows have been in during that period and they're out on pastures later on in the summer. So all in all, it should improve the situation. And by letting us do this and letting us evolve, you're helping us sort of keep the area green and keeping us farming. So it's obviously the track seems to be quite an issue, so I can move on to that now quickly. That track is the main access track for the farm. And I appreciate some of the comments about restricting usage and things like that and surfacing it. And we would love to surface that. I would love to have a nice concrete track on my farm. We have priced it up. It's over £100,000 to do the whole length of the track. We've made a loss the last 2 years. And having that kind of money to invest in something which has no real impact on our financial performance it's just a pipe dream at the moment. If we could get a grant to do it, we have tried that. We've looked at getting grants through Countryside Stewardship Scheme. They will give us grants to concrete new tracks on green fields, but they will not give you any grants to do anything to an existing track. So we've looked at that avenue and we can't do anything there. We did try putting down a chip seal over the first part of the track from the ice cream factory to the nursery school. That only lasted for less than 6 months and it was all ripped up by the heavy vehicles. So it would need a whole, basically, remake of the track. We can't control when a lot of our deliveries come. Our milk tanker comes at 2:30 every morning. That's just, we have to do what we're told. A lot of the traffic is from, a lot of the dust does tend to be the smaller delivery vans which are in a rush and go down there at a speed. We do have signs and again, we're doing the best we can. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Do I have any questions, please, for the applicant? Right, start with Councillor Cross, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming. So, I know the questions about noise have really focused on the track, as far as I understand. In terms of the operation, so there's no more. The number of cattle remains the same per annum, and the number of calves remains the same overall. Is it fair to say that weaning is one of the noisier times of year? And do you have measures in place already, such as the quiet wean nose flaps, to reduce that, for example? And is there any change to where the weaning happens, for example, with this proposal? Just trying to understand, what operationally it means. We're very aware we're looking at the difference between the existing and the current, and we're actually just focused on particularly the application here, so that our powers are limited as to what we can actually comment on. And I totally understand the financial position that farmers are in. So keen to hear about how the weaning is and how what changes there would be to that, and about the noise mitigation. Thank you.
So weaning, you're quite right, weaning can be a very noisy process. That tends to be more with suckler herds, where the calf's been on the dam probably for up to six to 8 months. They're very attached, and when you separate them, you have a lot of noise from the calf and the mother calling to each other. On a dairy herd like ours, we take the calf away from the dam normally within a few hours. So it's mainly for disease control. We're trying to control a disease called Johne's disease, so we're currently snatching calves. The longest we'd leave them would be maybe 12 hours, because that cow needs to get onto a good milking ration and get away. And again, if you leave the calves with the cows, they tend to get trampled. So we take the calves taken away straight away. They're raised initially in individual, sort of in a covered barn and sheep hurdles for the first 2 or 3 days, where we can make sure they're drinking well, they're healthy, and they haven't got any problems. And then they then go into those igloos, which you saw on the presentation. So they're pretty much in exactly the same place. They're going to be just 20 metres the other side of a tree. We'll then keep them in the igloos for the first we tend 3 to 4 weeks. After that, last year we did keep them in there till sort of 8 to 9 weeks, but they just get a bit big and they don't get enough solid feed, and then they don't wean particularly well, and you have health problems. So the plan is we'll move them out at 4 weeks. They'll then go into this new shed, and we'll gradually reduce the milk and increase the concentrate feed, and it reduces so gradually they sort of aren't really bothered by it by the end. So you don't really get any real noise, nothing like you would from a suckler herd being separated, which I know is quite a noisy week when it happens. So yeah, that's.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Yes, you know, I've not been involved with the dairy farm, but yeah, so I know from the suckling side that's where there has been noise, and really good to hear that explanation, which gives reassurance for people. Thank you.
Councillor Kinsley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming in, giving us a little insight into your world. I just wanted to try and get a handle on whether the new system that you're proposing is actually going to result in an increase of vehicle traffic. Presumably, is it the same number of calves, and will it be the same number of lorries for, you know, for deliveries and for taking the calves away? Will there be an increase in traffic?
Right. Actually, I think there should be quite a decent reduction. When we are on the system at the moment, if we don't have enough space for all the calves, they need to be taken away. With the current TB legislation, you have to move a calf before it's 40 days old. Otherwise, you have to do a pre-movement test. So the beef calves would have to go before they're 40 days old. They need to be as close to 40 days as possible, so they're as big as possible, so they're worth the most. So what tends to happen is you have a calf dealer. They go around various different dairy farms in a pickup with a trailer, often in a rush, going down a dirt track with the 8-wheeler trailer. That is probably the most dusty vehicle we get. They would typically come twice a week at the beginning and the end of the week to look at the calves, and they'd basically select the ones which they think are going to get a good price, and they'd take them away. So that would happen for probably 2 to 3 months of the year. They'd be taking the calves as we're calving. On the new system, we will keep all the calves till about 350 kilos, and then we'll get a big double-decker transport wagon would come and take 50 away at once. So there'd probably be two big lorries instead of a pickup and a trailer coming twice a week. So there should be less. Feeding-wise, we have a 10-ton hopper, which we use for putting the young stock cake in. At the moment, we can only put 2 or 3 ton in it because we don't use that much when they're going at a younger age. So we just fill the hopper up more. If you have too much at once, it'll go off. So it won't be any additional feed deliveries. We'll just get the same lorry, will just bring more. So it should be no increase for the supplies, but it should be having to have dealers come and take the calves off should reduce, and it go as one big batch. So we think it will be a reduction, and the actual construction phase we'll be doing in-house. So we use our own excavator and telehandler, and probably just hiring a cherry picker to put the roof on.
Councillor Stephen.
I've got 5 questions, if that's okay. First one, in your presentation, you said that the new way of doing things will be greener than your current way of doing things. Can you explain why that is greener?
Yes. So on an all-year-round system with high-yielding Holsteins, you have to basically keep them in-house the whole time. A Holstein cow needs to be fed, but she's sort of like your high-performance car kind of thing in the cow world. She has to be getting a high amount of energy, but she will give you a lot of milk for it. If you just chuck them out in a field when they've just calved, they'll do what's called milking off their backs. So they'll take energy out of their muscles, and they'll lose condition. And as with any mammal, if they're losing body condition, they don't cycle properly. So it's very hard to get them back in calf. With a dairy cow, she has to get back in calf every year, or she won't give you any milk. She's just an expensive lawnmower. So you need to make sure you're looking after them really well for that first sort of 90 days of their lactation to get them back in calf and to get the milk out of them. If you just chuck them all out in the field in the spring, you'll have a bit of a disaster. They'll start getting metabolic disorders. They won't get back in calf, and they won't give you much milk. What you can do with them is when they get to, say, 150 days or so, they're back in calf, they've had a really good peak, you can just chuck them out in the field, and they will milk well. They'll give you 20 litres, 20 to 25 litres just from grass. Your best cows, you can give them a little bit of concentrate extra in the parlour, and you'll get even more milk from them.
So what you're saying is that if you have a more intensive way of doing things, it's less carbon per litre of milk produced, basically?
No, not really. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying what I can do on a block system, I can rear them quite intensively, which we do anyway, but I can then also really make the most of getting feed from grass when there is grass in the spring and summer months, which is very hard to do on an all-year-round system at the size we are, because I can turn probably 40% of my herd out, they're at the right point to turn out over the spring and summer on an all-year-round system. But then it's just giving you more work to do. You're trying to manage the fences for 40%. You're still doing all the indoor jobs for all the other ones, and it creates more work. You need more labour to be able to do it. Whereas on an all-year-round system, they all go around together, so I can do it with less labour and more cows are at that really efficient point instead of just 40% of the herd, pretty much 100%. So I won't need to buy in so much concentrate. So I can get the same amount of milk out of the cows and buying in less concentrate overall, which is your big carbon saving.
Okay, thank you. On the track, where obviously there's lots of concern about the dust and noise, you said that you've already got some signs that sort of remind people to go slower. Would one solution perhaps be to have a speed bump at the beginning and middle and the end of that track? That'd be something that would be worth considering.
That is something we could look at, but I mean it is quite badly potholed quite a lot of the year, so
Right,
that
it's
does
built in,
probably do more
right.
than a speed bump, but
Okay.
it doesn't always seem to help.
Okay, fine. Okay, next question. In the planning application, it says that you're going to put some solar panels on the roof as well, and it's going to be 10% of your energy use. Is that 10% of the farm's energy use or 10% of the energy use in the actual building? Because I can imagine the amount of energy you're going to use in the building is some strip lights. It could be very small panels, but how many panels are we thinking of putting on?
We probably, I don't even know if we're going to put any lights in there at all, to be fair. We probably won't need to. But we've currently got we're looking at putting a 70 kilowatt array on the roofs of the farm sheds, which will hopefully be the vast majority of our usage. Which shed we put them on, we'd probably look at the shortest wiring to make it the most efficient. But we will hopefully put them on, the south-facing shed. So we do have our main cattle shed is a big south-facing roof, which would be more efficient from solar yield. So we would look to fill that one first, and then this wouldn't be south-facing. This would be, I think, east and west-facing. So which I don't believe is as sufficient. But yeah, we would move on to this roof if there was demand for further electricity. But we're just waiting for the grid to confirm whether we can have the connection to put the solar array up at the moment, which is where we are. But we're hoping to press ahead with that this year.
Thank you. So my next question, in some of the objectors' comments, people talked about flies on slurry pools and that sort of stuff. So I can imagine cows in fields, their slurry is sort of spread out all over the place. In a shed, it's going to be more intensified, and you have to have a slurry pool for that, I'm guessing. I don't really understand how that works, but is that something that's covered, or will it be an increase in what you've already got? So how does that actually work? And is that a legitimate cause of concern? Will there be more smells and flies and that sort of stuff from this new scheme?
Not really. I think it's more from a lack of understanding of how the farm works. So we have the main cow sheds where the milking cows are on a slurry system. So they're on cubicles. So the cows sit on a raised portion. And then you have a sort of muck passage where the muck is, which is then scrapes out towards a slurry lagoon, which is at the other end of the unit. This barn isn't going to be a slurry system. It's just bedded straw. So they'll be on straw beds, which will be bedded down, topped up with straw regularly, and then probably every couple of months the cattle moved out, and we will go in with the telehandler and dig the muck out, and that will then go onto the muck piles. Or depending on the time of year, it might be spreaded straight into the fields as fertiliser. But we try not to put muck berries in those fields. We have had to in a few years in the past. As you could see from the flood map, we're limited on dry areas where we can put it. We do have a tenanted farm in Madresfield, so quite often we'll maybe put a temporary pile in the field and then track it down and take it down with tractors and trailers. But we try not to put it in the fields. We try to put it on the concrete yards. If we've got an empty silage plant, we'll fill that with muck, and then we're working on concrete, so we're not making a mess of the field. So it's really a last resort when we do that. But we are becoming more public facing, as a business. We've done a pumpkin patch this year and flower patch in that area, so we're obviously trying to keep that presentable and not have huge piles of muck. So, and also by having this facility, we should have the cows in there in the summer when they are making a mess of the field and poaching the field. That tends to create your environment for flies later in the year. So by not having to do that, it should improve the situation by having this facility.
Thank you. My last question is about you're going to be planting some trees. How old and how big are these trees going to be, and what sort of species are they going to be?
We're looking at just sort of standard native trees, quite quick growing. I'm happy to take guidance from someone who knows more about that and who's happy with that. So I'll probably give Chris Dodds a call.
And that might be something that comes up in the conditions
But
later on.
I mean, if anyone, if Chris
I mean, are
wants
they
to
going to
put
be
a
little
specific
spindles? Are they
thing.
going to be a little bit bigger trees?
No,
or,
hopefully, and get some quick growing
trees?
ones. Again, if they'd rather have Leylandis to make a bigger screen quicker, we'd happily, whatever people would prefer, we're happy to put up what's wanted, really.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. Councillor Emos.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Bennett, I've only got one question. I think you've had the advantage of hearing the residents, I think being extremely reasonable in relation to this application. And obviously they have concerns, which is why they're here. Would you be prepared to meet with them to discuss a possible solution to this track problem? Obviously, it is potholed, which obviously aggravates the noise, certainly for empty vehicles. And it seems to me that this is the one concern that residents have. I don't think they're, as far as I've heard, they're not concerned about the change of use or what you want to build or what you want to build it for. It's just the noise aspect. So can you offer some solution or a hope or meet with the residents really to address this? Because I think the history of this site in the past has been, there hasn't been this dialogue, and very often constructive dialogue can solve a problem quite easily.
Yeah, I mean, we're happy to discuss. I mean, we haven't really had any word from the neighbours about the track for, I think Environmental Health did look at it probably in 2015-16, which was a particularly dry year. But since then, no one's been in touch with us, as I'm aware, about the track or the condition until this application went in. But yeah, no, we're certainly happy to do what we can and to meet and discuss. I mean, we have an email and a telephone number which are publicly available, or if you want to pop round, we can have a look and do what we can. But we have tried doing things. We did chip seal the first section as an experiment, but it was a complete disaster. It just came up so quickly. We do keep topping up the potholes as we can. And again, when it is dusty, that tends to be when we're the busiest. It's a window in the weather, and we're busy on the fields bringing crops in, and we don't have the same sort of margins that you get in construction, where we can have a machine and a Bowser just going up and down all day. There's me and my arable guy, the two guys who drive tractors, and we're probably working from 4 in the morning till 7, 8 at night on get the silage in and get the harvest finished. So it's just not something we've got the manpower or the spare machinery to do it. If there's something we could do, we'd happily look at it, and we could look at getting some bigger signs up for speed limits, and be happy to maybe try some speed bumps or things. But yeah, we're happy to look at it, and we do really want to do something with the track, but it's just having the margins to do it. We've looked at getting grants at it. We looked at pricing up to concrete a track that long with strong enough concrete to take the size of vehicles that are required in modern agriculture these days. It's not a small job. It's not just like chip sealing your drive. You need a decent sub base and a good layer of reinforced concrete all the way. We are going to try and have a go with railway sleepers and do a railway sleeper section. The other problem we also have is it's used every day for the milk tanker, so you can't leave it for the concrete to go off for a week because the tanker's there every night. So it's quite a difficult one to do. But we are going to try and do a section with sleepers and see how that copes and lasts. And then if that does work, we're hoping to maybe try and do a bit each year and get the whole lot done. But it's not something we can really commit to in a condition, because we don't know what the milk price is going to be next month, let alone next year. So we can't really plan what our margins are going to be. And we have unless there's a definite way we could get a grant for it under, if the SFI rules change or on the new subsidy schemes they're bringing away, we could do that. We'd certainly apply for it and we'd be very, very happy to do it, putting our labour in for free if we could get the materials. But at the moment, we just can't afford to spend so much money when there isn't a return coming back on the bottom line to pay for it. I can't get finance for it because I'm not going to have a mechanism to pay for it. But yeah, quite happy to meet the local residents if they want to discuss what we can do. And yeah, we're...
Councillor Agar. Oh, sorry.
Very briefly, just follow that up.
Okay.
I'm on green, which is unusual for me, but it's on red now. Well, that's just as bad, but never mind. The thing is, Mr. Bennett, I understand exactly what you're saying, but of course, the longer the track is left unrepaired, the worse it becomes. I know it's a chicken and egg argument, but I mean, perhaps if we could be, and you're hinting at being perhaps sort of imaginative in your solution. I don't know, the residents speak for themselves, but sort of a concrete, reinforced concrete path. I agree that's probably off the agenda, but something like railway sleepers, for example, is an imaginative solution that may work. In other words, it's something that's worth trying because clearly there is a problem, and it's a bit unfortunate that we've got an application here and we seem to be possibly going to leave a problem dangling in the air. And I can't see that's going to get any better by ignoring it because it's only going to get worse, isn't it?
Well, I'd say that track's been there for, well, the farm unit's been down there, I think since before the 1970s, that's been there, and that's been the main access track for that farm since 1970, and it's always been an unsealed track. So to say it's unrepaired, that's just how it is. It's an unsealed agricultural track. We patch it up, we fill in the potholes regularly. When you get particularly wet periods, it gets a bit worse, and then we've taken the 360 digger down there when it gets particularly bad and try and recamber it. So we're constantly maintaining it, as is typical for any other agricultural track. So to say it's deteriorating, getting worse, I don't think it's accurate. That's just how an unsealed track is. We would like to improve it, as I've said, but again, it's not connected to this application. This application is not going to put more traffic down there. It's going to reduce the traffic down there. So I don't think this is the correct forum or place to address the track issue. I think if we were putting up a development which was going to double the traffic down there, I could completely see your point, but this application is going to reduce the traffic to it and make the situation better. So I don't think this is the appropriate place to condition the track to make it be improved. There isn't the finances to do it, and it's not increasing the usage on it. But again, we're happy to help and do what we can and meet with residents to find a way forward. But I don't believe this is appropriate forum to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming to speak to us this afternoon. It may seem quite gruelling at times, but it's not the intention, I assure you. I've got a short question, and I'm sure a short answer will be quite satisfactory. There are elements of the build are prefabricated. You've got prefabricated panels that you will apply to a steel frame with a concrete base, is my understanding. If that's the case, I'm assuming the construction phase is quite quick. So I wondered how long you were anticipating it would take and when you hope to start.
As we already have permitted development for the hay barn, we have started. The footings are dug, and we were hoping to concrete them this last week, but I've got a red tractor inspection tomorrow, so we've had to delay that. But we'll hopefully have the footings will concrete ourselves next week because we have a pan mixer and aggregate already on the yard. And then the kit is due to be delivered next week, and then we'll hopefully have the steel frame up in a week. We'll probably hire a telehandler and do that with our own equipment, and then it'll just be a matter of putting the roof sheets on, which will probably maybe take another week, and then it's just a case of putting the gates on and the boarding, and concreting the first bay where the cattle will be standing and the feed bay.
Thank you. So I'm assuming you don't need to work all hours. You'll be able to do it within a reasonable time frame and within reasonable hours.
Yes, I mean, we certainly won't be doing it in the dark this time of year, so it'll be done in daylight hours. And again, we have to fit it around our other jobs. So we're starting at 4:30 in the morning, feeding the cattle, which is probably far noisier and milking than putting up a shed. And then the shed work will be done sort of in the middle of the day between probably 9:30 and 3 o'clock when we're back on the afternoon routine again.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Udall now, please.
I think 3 questions, Chair. I would be grateful for clarity from Mr Bennett about the proposals. I'm reading in paragraph 3.1 that it will be used for 150 cars from 4 weeks old to 10 months old. Does that mean that the building itself will only be in operational use for 9 months of the year, or am I misreading that?
Pretty much, yes. But what we're hoping to do once all the calves have been sold, probably in May time, is then use the front of the building as a feed face for the pregnant cattle. We had just been doing them in the field, as you saw on the presentation, and when it's a wet summer, they can make quite a big mess of the field. So instead of tearing up the field, they can walk into the shed and they'll be able to walk back out and lie out in the field.
So essentially, the use of this building will be during the winter months rather than the summer months. Am I again misunderstanding, or is that the case?
That is the case, yes. It'll be used for calf rearing when the calves are born, so they'll be moving in September. They'll stay in there all winter, and then depending on our TB status and the market, we'll hope to be selling them in the late spring.
And putting it bluntly, that means that the track itself, which we've been talking about, is more likely to be damp in the autumn and winter months than dry and hard as it would be in the summer months. So the consequences of dust is reduced by the seasonal activity. Again, am I misunderstanding, or is that reality?
No, that is the reality, yes. Okay. The building will be pretty much empty.
Just a couple of other questions. Will there be any cattle crushers on site or dehorning measures which can create noise for neighbours?
The young cattle won't need to go into a crush for anything. For TB tests, we'll take them into our existing facilities, and that's no different to what is done at the moment. Dehorning, they're dehorned in the igloos before they'll go into the shed. It's much easier to do them in the small things. Again, they're all anaesthetised, so it doesn't really make any noise.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Kimberley now, please.
Thank you. No, I tend to take the view that I think going directly after the track is a bit of a sort of a bit of a red herring to me. But I think that there is the very real question in terms of the rewilding or the sort of the planting of the area around the boundary. Since I've put the question to your neighbour, I felt that it would only be fair to ask you the question as well, from the perspective of the farm, and sort of making sure that proposals are not going forward that are going to completely be infeasible or break the bank. But looking at the recommendations in terms of, again, I'm going to go back to that section. Bear with me 1 second while I scroll. There was a recommendation to go slightly beyond the tree planting that was suggested in the plan, and to actually create a small belt that would provide some protection from noise and dust, and would also enhance the visual appeal of the site. Is that something that you would be amenable to, and have you had any advice from our officers about how that could be achieved?
Yes, we have advice from the officers, and that was basically including a bund in the screen, so basically increasing the width, so we'd have a 5 metre wide bund which would be fully screened. And yes, that wouldn't be a problem. We're amenable to that. We wanted to have a break in the corner so that in the summer, when we are using it for our pregnant cattle, they can come in and out of the shed and get through a gap there either side of it. So that was our only real concern. But yeah, we're quite happy to make it a bit wider and increase the area for the biodiversity. That's not an issue.
Okay, I've got Councillor Barnes now, please.
Mr Bennett has already answered my questions.
Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned, Mr Bennett, that you're a 5th generation farmer, and you've also mentioned that the track has been there since 1970. Now, I believe that the houses in Cormorant Rise and Crane Drive are more recent than that. Can you confirm that that's the case, and that the track was actually in use before the houses were built?
Yes, that is the case. Yeah, the farm unit was moved down there before those areas were sold off for housing. Yes.
Thank you. Land as well?
Yes, it was. It's compulsory purchased and then, yeah, sold off to keep it there again.
Councillor Rudge, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's difficult farming. And fascinating to hear the technical details involved in trying to make it function. I don't think generally we always appreciate that. I can see how making all the cows calve at the same time makes the whole farm far more efficient, and I think that's a very sensible way to go. I wasn't sure, now that you've got planning permission obviously for the hay barn, have you got space to store hay if this is being used for cattle rearing? Or I presume there's not another planning application going in to store hay, but maybe there's a solution to that. That was my one question. The second is, I wonder, it seems like the people who built the houses didn't really give it much thought as to how much screening was needed. Is there space between the housing and the track to put more screening in, or not?
In short, no. The track is right against the houses. It would mean completely reciting the access track, which again would need permissions and considerable expense. But there's not a sort of dead ground area where anything could be done easily. And so your other question was
just the hay barn.
The hay barn. We have an existing hay barn, and we hope we do not want to have to do this, but if we're unsuccessful with this application, that hay barn has no restrictions on it, so we could turn that into a livestock barn. But that is closer to the houses, and we would actually have to drive up that main access track with the feeder wagon at least once a day, probably in the early hours, which would be quite disruptive. That's not something we want to do. But if we had to, that would be our only other option if we can't get planning permission for a livestock shed. We have to just rely on permitted development sheds.
This is a better solution?
Yes, but all round for us as the farm and for the residents.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett, for answering all those questions. I think everybody probably has asked questions, so that's quite a thing. Thank you very much. If we move to questions, please, for the officers. Has anyone want to go first? Councillor Kimberley, dive in.
Any guesses as to what I'm going to say? I was going to just ask, is there any amendment required to fully implement the Biodiversity and Landscape Advisor's recommendations? If there is, then may I propose it?
Through you, Chair, the conditions as recommended in terms of landscaping are already included as part of the conditions, so there's no further additional requirements.
Fantastic, thank you.
Councillor Stephen.
In regards to the screening trees, my question is, in terms of the conditions, are there any conditions about the size and the age of the trees that are going to be planted there?
Through you, Chair, yes, there is a landscape condition at condition 4, which asks for a schedule of proposed planting, which is species, sizes at the time of planting, numbers, density of plants for that 10-metre wide area. So that will be a discussion and considered by our tree officer and the landscape and biodiversity officer prior to.
So I guess what I'm asking is, what's to stop someone saying, yeah, oh well, we'll just put these tiny little spindles in there rather than having a bit of a bigger tree there? I mean, how do you decide how big a tree and how wide it is and how old and tall it is?
In terms of landscaping, there is a British standards for that. So there's British standards in terms of landscaping in relation to development. There's also British standards in terms of landscaping, maintenance, establishment and going forward. So as part of that, our tree officer will be looking at the fact that it needs to be screened. So the fact that it needs to be screened requires a certain size of tree. So we will be requiring that if the applicant, and I don't think they will, but if the applicant did propose the spindly little trees, that wouldn't be something that officers would approve. It would have to be a decent tree that would allow for establishment.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, aren't we lucky to have a tree officer at City Council, as well as a biodiversity officer? I think we are blessed at the moment. Councillor Amos.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Perhaps Mr. Round can just pick up on these points at the end. There are 3 pages of conditions. As you know, conditions always bother me because they can be ignored, they can be changed, they can be rescinded without anything coming back to this committee. But there are two that I'm assuming the applicant knows about. One of them is 7, which is that if this building no longer is in agricultural use, the use of the building is discontinued, in other words, the development in this application shall be removed within 6 months. And the other application, and I'm talking about the history of this site, it's an unfortunate history, Chair, won't go into it now, but this site has a very unfortunate history. I think Mr. Round is aware of the unfortunate history. So we'll know why I'm raising item 9. No development shall commence until a lighting strategy, etc., etc., has been submitted to and approved by the local authority. So I'm assuming, Mr. Round, let's just confirm this, that the applicant is aware of these conditions. And the other question is, I would like some kind of condition on the track, because we have an application here, Chair, and the purpose of the application is to introduce a change on this location. I think nobody around the table has any objection to the change as such, but obviously one of the consequences is the track issue has come to the fore because we're discussing the location. Now, it may well be that instead of having a larger number of smaller vehicles, you've got a fewer number of journeys with large vehicles. And obviously, if it's potholed, so on and so on, that will alter the noise profile. So to say it doesn't make any difference is a bit bizarre, when it clearly does make a difference whether you've got big lorries or small lorries. And I don't think the residents are asking much, just to say, look, given this change has come up, given that we are now discussing this situation, that we can't think of something constructive. The residents, Chair, are not asking for a concreted track from the entrance up to the buildings. I mean, nobody's asking for that. They're asking a bit of imagination, a bit of cooperation, a bit of goodwill, a bit of consideration from the applicant. That's what they're asking for. And you saw the objector here. Very reasonable, very reasonable. And I think that this committee should respond to that reasonableness. There's no intention to cause any difficulty, but equally, Chair, they shouldn't have to put up with, dust or sort of every year or unnecessary noise. In other words, I'm asking for a condition that can be constructive but practical. That's all I'm asking for.
Thank you, Councillor Amos. I think we will have clarification on this now.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Amos, in terms of the questions in respect to the conditions, the applicant has seen the conditions. Condition 7 is a condition that is attached to any permitted development requirement. So again, it's something that we felt was appropriate to apply to this building, as it's a swap over in terms of what they've already got approval for. In terms of condition 9, yes, they've seen that as well in terms of the lighting strategy, and that is to be provided. In terms of what members need to consider in terms of the conditions or otherwise in terms of the track, you will have heard the applicant discuss in terms of their farm operations. And what members need to consider is this going to cause any additional use to the track? What your officer's advice is that this development won't have any further impact on the track, and therefore to restrict the access to the existing farm is not, in my view, to be reasonable in terms of either putting an hour's use on it or restricting the type of vehicles. However, having said that, the applicant has provided that plan, which I did put on as part of the presentation, which shows the direction of the telehandler and the feeder wagon, which will come down the southern central track and service the barns. If members wish to reinforce condition 2, which talks about the development should be carried out wholly in accordance with the plans that have been submitted, they could make reference to that plan, because the applicant has put forward that as the way in which they will use those. However, what that condition will need to do is put in a catch-all that in case the southern access track is inaccessible for whatever reason, we can't have a condition that prevents the applicant feeding cows or cattle just because they can't use the access track. So I think it would need to be very carefully worded, but it would need to be limited to what the proposal is, rather than trying to deal with a situation that exists as part of the rest of the farm.
Thank you. Councillor Barnes?
Thank you, Chair. This applicant already has planning permission for a barn. The track will be used whatever. I don't see that there's very much to discuss. He's come up with a solution which won't make things worse by having to move into a barn that's less suitable and have to have even more traffic on that northern track. So on that basis, I think we ought to grant planning permission, and I put that forward as a suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. If we just park that for a moment, because we've got some other questions. Councillor Udall?
Well, I actually agree with what Councillor Barnes has just said. I must say, I did clip my ears up when I heard the mention of green milk. I hope that's never going to be served anywhere. We've heard a lot of discussion about the track this afternoon, and what I think I've heard from the cross-examination from Mr. Bennett is it's going to be done mostly in the winter, mostly when it's wet, and there's going to be less use of the track than there is currently. I don't think I can justify seeking planning conditions to make it more difficult to use the track when actually this application is going to create an improvement to the use of the track. I certainly don't think sleeping policemen or road bumps is a good idea. My experience of those is when they're hit at speed, it makes a damn sight more noise and vibration and dust than if they're not there. So I certainly wouldn't want that. The applicant has heard the concerns of residents and has heard the concerns of members around this table, and I do think he may want to consider providing an undertaking to have a 10-mile-an-hour speed limit on that track, but that's not something which I would want to condition. It's something which he has heard the concerns about and may be willing to undertake some sort of assistance to offer in return for support. I have got sympathy for the residents living adjacent to the site, but they do have to remember they are living next to the only working dairy farm in Worcester. And that is a significant issue for them when I assume they chose to move into that area. So I think the balance of issues here, the balance of support, I think has to go to the farm and has to go in support of the application. And if Councillor Barnes is moving it, I'm more than happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Udall. I think that's extremely useful. And and I suppose what Mr. Bennett was saying is that he hadn't heard about the problems with the track, and actually this planning application has provided a useful way of connecting the residents with the farm again, and hopefully that will continue and improve dialogue and communication. I've now got Councillor Agar.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm inclined to agree that I wouldn't want to impose any further conditions, because if there should be any problems with noise and pollution from the track, I do think that's a matter for another service, not us, and it's a matter for regulatory services, really. And I don't think it would be reasonable to add a further condition at this stage. This application is a betterment from what exists at present, and I can't really see that we have a reason to reject it for that reason. The use of the hay barn, well, they could use that anyway if they wanted to. And I think this is much better. We've got the screening, you know, we've got biodiversity net gain, we've got a number of benefits here. So I think really this is the best application for the site that we're likely to get, and I think we should accept it.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Agar. I think it's worth noting now, if we just, I'll check some more questions in a minute, is that the recommended conditions, a lot of them are saying prior to commencement, and the applicant did say that they'd already started. So what are we going to do about the conditions, please, Paul?
Scrap the lot. No, I didn't say that. So in terms of conditions, members, what I suggest is that in terms of, as the applicant has implemented the permitted development scheme, which is perfectly within his liberty, so condition 1 needs to be deleted because development has already commenced. Condition 3, I would suggest that prior to the first prior to their first use, details of samples and details of external materials to be submitted. So condition 4 would be prior to the first use of the building, a landscaping scheme should be submitted. Condition 6, in terms of archaeology, would be within 1 month of the date of this permission, details of archaeology should be provided. Condition 9 would be prior to the installation of any external lighting, a lighting strategy, including details of the external lighting and a plan providing lux spill should be provided. And I think that would be the only the amendments that would be required.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'm just wondering whether if the applicant is actually going to be building this quite quickly, they've probably got samples already, and whether actually they could still provide them before they go up. I don't know. So I wonder whether we could, because actually seeing the samples before they go up is probably a good idea. That's all I'm thinking.
Through you, Chair, I think if it's prior to their first use, we can do that, or if the applicant wish to submit them prior to the issue of the decision within the next day or so, it might be something that we can have that discussion with the applicant.
Okay. Okay, that's fair. Do we have any other questions, please? No? Any other comments? Councillor Cross?
Thank you. I echo the words of Councillor Barnes and also agree that, given the situation, I would be happy to support those amendments to the conditions, but happy to move to the vote on this and to indicate my support.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cross. So Paul did talk about amending one of the conditions to do with the future access, I think. Yes. So how would we go about doing that? You said it has to be delicately written.
Through, Chair, I think from the discussion, I would say that most of the comments have been not to introduce any further conditions.
That's true. I just wanted to check that because somebody did raise that and we did talk about it. Are we happy to not do that? No.
So the proposal is?
Yeah, so the proposal at the moment is to have the conditions amended, as Paul has said, either deleted or changed to first use, with no additional conditions. That's the proposal I think I've got at the moment from Councillor Agar and seconded by Councillor Udall. Is that fair? Oh, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Barnes, sorry. Is that fair? You're happy without the amended condition? So I think, first of all, we probably need to have a vote on that and see whether that carries, if that's okay. Yep, everyone happy? Okay, so on that basis, amending the conditions to be first use or deleted as appropriate, can I see all votes in favour? Abstentions? And that's all the votes. Thank you, so that has carried. Thank you very much. Right, so what's next on the agenda? Any other business? There is no any other business. So therefore, I can close the meeting. And thank you for everybody for the contribution today. I think it was a really fruitful discussion. And thanks for coming to the training. I'll see you next month. Thank you.